Looks like someone's been doing their homework on hair loss. Wow. Going through all this research, I'm kind of struck by just how many different ways people are trying to tackle this thing. Ancient remedies, high-tech treatments.
It's like where old school wisdom meets cutting edge science, you know?
Yeah, totally. And it seems like everyone's got a different opinion on what actually works, but you always seem to cut through the noise and figure out what's what. So let's dive into this research and help our listener make sense of it all. See if we can figure out what might actually help them.
Sounds good to me. It looks like our listeners really interested in how well these different hair loss remedies work, like, how practical they are, whether they're natural or, more medical. So maybe we should start with one of the big ones, DHT.
Okay, DHT. You mentioned before how it plays a part in androgenetic alopecia, which I know is like the most common type of hair loss. And my research really focused on that. It seems like DHT is often the one to blame when hair starts thinning out. But is it really the main villain in this story? Or is there more to it?
Well, DHT definitely plays a big part, especially for people who are genetically prone to androgenetic alopecia. But it's not as simple as saying high DHT automatic hair loss. It really comes down to how sensitive your hair follicles are to DHT.
So even if someone has low DHT levels, they could still lose hair if their follicles are like super sensitive to it.
Exactly. And that sensitivity often comes down to genetics.
Which explains why there's so much talk about family history in all this research. Everyone wants to know if hair loss runs in the family.
Yeah, it makes sense. People want to know if they're predisposed to it. But like your research showed, it's not a surefire predictor.
Right. I found it really interesting that it's not just one gene, it's multiple genes involved. So it's not as simple as looking at your parents' hair and assuming you'll end up the same way.
Exactly. It's a whole bunch of genes interacting with each other and other factors, too, that determine how likely someone is to experience hair loss from DHT.
Which brings us to the big question, what can you actually do about it? My research was full of stuff about DHT blockers, both natural and pharmaceutical. Saw palmetto, pumpkin seed oil, green tea. It's like a whole pantry full of potential solutions.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of interest in natural remedies these days, and some people do see good results with them. Actually, one of your sources mentioned someone who had success with saw palmetto, but they had stomach problems until they started taking it with food.
Right, good point. It's a good reminder that even natural remedies can have side effects or interact with other things. Makes you realize it's important to pay attention to what your body's telling you, and maybe even check with a doctor before starting anything new, even if it's natural.
Totally agree. Natural remedies are definitely appealing, but it's good to be realistic about them. They don't always have the same level of scientific evidence behind them as medications that are specifically designed to block DHT, like finasteride.
Finasteride, that's Propecia, right? I noticed some sources were really positive about how well it works, but others mentioned potential side effects like mood changes. One person even talked about switching to a lower dose to deal with those side effects.
That's why personalized treatment is so important. What works for one person might not work for another. It's super important to work with a healthcare professional to figure out the best approach for you. Consider your specific needs and how much risk you're comfortable with.
It's kind of like a puzzle, isn't it? You have to find the right pieces that fit together for you.
Exactly. And speaking of puzzle pieces, there's another important one we need to talk about. Nutrition. You found a ton of info on vitamins and minerals that are linked to hair health. It's like our hair follicles need their own personal multivitamin.
Yeah. Zinc, betatin, iron, vitamin D, the list goes on and on. I have to admit, though, I got a little lost with all the conflicting information. One article said red meat is essential for lysine and zinc, while another was all about a plant-based diet for healthy hair. So am I supposed to go full carnivore or, like, become a vegan?
Yeah, that's a common problem when you're researching health stuff online. There are so many different opinions, and it can be tough to know what's actually true and what's just hype.
So how do we navigate this whole nutrition maze?
Well, it's important to remember that while not getting enough of certain nutrients can play a role in hair loss, it's usually not the main cause.
So popping a biotin pill isn't going to magically solve all our hair problems.
Probably not. Taking care of any vitamin deficiencies is good, but it's more about seeing nutrition as part of a bigger approach to hair health. It's not a quick fix. And like you said, different diets work for different people.
Right. I really liked that one source that talked about how gut health is connected to hair health. It's like our whole body is connected, so what's good for our gut is good for our hair too.
Exactly. A healthy gut microbiome helps your body absorb nutrients. And there's more and more research suggesting that problems with the gut microbiome can be linked to all sorts of health issues, even hair loss.
It's amazing how much we're still learning about how our bodies work and all the tiny organisms that live inside us. Speaking of connections, one thing that kept popping up in my research was stress. Is stress really that big of a deal when it comes to hair loss?
It's a bigger deal than most people think. When you're stressed all the time, your body releases hormones like cortisol, and that can mess with your hair's natural growth cycle.
So basically, stress can send our hair follicles into panic mode, making them shed hair too early.
That's a great way to put, and your research mentioned some good ways to manage stress. Things like yoga, meditation, and regular exercise.
Oh, and even something as simple as having a cup of coffee. I was surprised to learn that caffeine might actually protect hair follicles, kind of counteracting some of the damage stress can cause.
Yeah, it's interesting. It shows how even small lifestyle choices can impact our hair.
So it's not just about what we put on our hair, but also about how we're taking care of ourselves overall. Which brings us to what we're putting on our scalps. I found some interesting DIY remedies in my research: apple cider vinegar, onion juice, even silica-rich water. Are these worth trying, or are they just old wives' tales?
A lot of those remedies are based on the idea that a healthy scalp is important. Having the right pH balance, keeping it hydrated, and having a good balance of bacteria on the scalp. All of that is key for hair growth.
So it's like a plant needing healthy soil to grow. Our hair needs a healthy scalp.
Exactly. But while those DIY remedies might sound tempting, it's good to be careful with them. For example, apple cider vinegar, it's often used to balance the scalp's pH, but it can be pretty harsh if you don't dilute it properly.
Yeah, I read about someone who tried a DIY onion juice treatment, and it ended up irritating their scalp more than helping it.
It's a good reminder that even natural things can have downsides. Always a good idea to do a patch test before you put anything new on your scalp.
Okay, so be cautious with the DIY stuff, but what about the things we use every day? Could our shampoo or styling products be contributing to hair loss?
That's a great question. Your research brought up some interesting debates in the hair care world. For example, there's been a lot of talk about fluoride in water and whether it affects hair health.
Yeah, and some sources recommended sulfate-free shampoos, saying that sulfates can strip the hair of its natural oils, making it dry and brittle.
Those are definitely areas where it depends on your personal preferences and how sensitive your scalp is. Some people find that ingredients like sulfates or silicones irritate their scalp or weigh their hair down, but others don't have any problems with them.
It's kind of like finding the right skincare routine. What works for one person might not work for another. So we've covered a lot: DHT, nutrition, stress, scalp health. But what if none of that is enough? What about those more high-tech treatments I found in my research? Things like PRP, microneedling, laser therapy. Are those real options?
They definitely can be, but it's important to remember that they're medical procedures. You need to treat them with the same care and consideration as any other medical treatment.
So not something to try at home with a DIY kit.
Definitely not. Those procedures should only be done by qualified professionals, preferably a board-certified dermatologist who specializes in hair loss.
That makes sense. When it comes to our health, it's always best to get advice from the experts. So let's talk about these professional treatments and what they actually involve. First up, PRP. What exactly is platelet-rich plasma, and how does it help hair follicles?
Okay, so with PRP, a small amount of your blood is drawn, just like a regular blood test. Then they spin the blood in a machine to separate the platelet-rich plasma from the rest of it. And that concentrated PRP is then injected back into your scalp where the hair loss is happening.
So it's like giving your hair follicles a super dose of those growth factors? That's pretty cool. But what about microneedling? That one sounds kind of intense.
So with microneedling, they use a device with tiny needles to create little punctures in the scalp. This is thought to stimulate collagen production and possibly help topical hair loss treatments absorb better.
I read that the depth of those needles is super important. If it's not done right, it can cause scarring. Definitely sounds like something you'd want a professional to handle. What about laser therapy? Is that something people can do at home?
There are laser therapy devices that you can use at home, and there are also ones that they use in clinics. They all use low-level laser light to try to stimulate hair follicles and encourage growth.
So you could be like wearing a laser helmet while watching your favorite show. That's pretty wild. But do those devices actually work?
There's some promising research on low-level laser therapy for hair loss, but the results could be different for everyone. Like a lot of hair loss treatments, consistency is key.
Okay, so it's not like you wear it once and suddenly have a full head of hair.
Not quite. It's more about creating a good environment for hair growth over time.
All right, that makes sense. Like with anything else, you have to put in the effort to see results. Those at-home laser devices sound really interesting, but I'm also curious about the in-office treatments we were talking about earlier, like PRP and microneedling. They seem really effective, but also kind of intense. What should someone consider before trying those treatments?
The most important thing is to talk to a dermatologist who specializes in hair loss. They can look at your specific situation, see if you're a good candidate for those treatments, and talk about the potential benefits and risks. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right, like we were saying before, personalized treatment is super important. So let's say someone decides to go the professional route. What exactly happens during a PRP treatment? Is it painful? What's the recovery like?
Well, first they draw a little bit of your blood, just like a normal blood test. Then they spin the blood in a machine to separate the platelet-rich plasma. And then they inject that concentrated PRP into your scalp where you're losing hair.
So it's like giving your hair follicles a boost of growth factors, right?
Yep, that's the idea. The injections might be a little uncomfortable, but most people handle it fine. There's usually not much downtime. You can pretty much go back to your normal activities right away.
Good to know. What about microneedling? How does that work and what's it like to get it done?
Microneedling uses a device with tiny needles to create tiny punctures in your scalp. This basically triggers your body's natural healing process, which can stimulate collagen production and maybe even boost hair growth.
So it's like you're tricking your body into thinking it needs to repair the scalp, and then all these good things start happening for your hair follicles.
That's a good way to think about it.
But I'm guessing there's some downtime with microneedling. Having little punctures in your scalp doesn't sound like a walk in the park.
Yeah, you'll already have some redness and swelling after the treatment, but it usually goes away within a day or two. Your dermatologist will give you instructions on how to care for your scalp afterward to make sure it heals properly and to minimize any risks.
It's good to know that these procedures, even though they might sound a little scary, are generally pretty easy to handle and don't require much downtime. But let's switch gears for a minute and talk about something a bit more low-tech. Hair care routines. We tend to focus on treatments and products, but could the way we take care of our hair every day be affecting its health in ways we don't even realize?
Absolutely. How you treat your hair daily can really make a difference in how healthy and strong it is.
One thing I saw a lot of debate about in my research was how often to wash your hair. Some people are all about washing it every day, while others say it strips away natural oils and can make hair loss worse. What are your thoughts on this age-old debate?
Honestly, there's no one right answer. It really depends on your hair type, scalp condition, and personal preference. For someone with oily hair, washing more often might be necessary to keep their scalp clean and prevent buildup that could affect hair growth. But for someone with dry or sensitive skin, washing less often might be better to preserve natural oils and keep the scalp healthy.
So it's about listening to your scalp and figuring out what works best for you. There's that personalized care theme again.
Exactly. And speaking of personalized care, even the type of brush you use can matter.
Oh, right. I remember seeing all kinds of special brushes and detanglers in my research. Do those fancy brushes really make a difference, or is it all just marketing hype?
A good brush can definitely make a difference. Using a brush with rough bristles, especially when your hair is wet, can cause breakage and damage. It's better to choose a brush with soft, flexible bristles that can gently detangle your hair without pulling on it or causing friction.
Makes sense. It's like using the right tools for the job. You wouldn't use a hammer to tighten a screw, right? But what about all those styling tools? Blow dryers, curling irons, straighteners. They can make our hair look amazing, but are we sacrificing long-term health for short-term style?
Overdoing it with heat styling can definitely be tough on your hair. It can lead to dryness, breakage, and even split ends.
Okay, that's not great news, but I'm not giving up my twirling iron just yet. Are there any ways to minimize the damage? I know some of the sources talk about heat protectant sprays. Do those actually work?
Heat protectant sprays can definitely help. They create a barrier between your hair and the heat, so there's less damage. It's also a good idea to not use heat styling as often, use lower temperatures when you can, and try not to keep the heat on the same section of hair for too long.
Great tips. Sounds like there's a lot we can do every day to protect our hair and make it easier for it to grow. But let's go back to nutrition for a minute. We talked about specific vitamins and minerals, but what about our overall diet? Does what we eat really have that much of an impact on our hair health?
Absolutely. Our hair is made of protein, so getting enough protein in your diet is crucial. But it's not just about protein. A balanced diet that includes lots of different nutrients, vitamins, minerals, healthy fats, all of that is important for keeping your whole body healthy, including your hair.
So balance is key, right? We talked about balancing our scalp's pH, figuring out how often to wash our hair, and now we're talking about balancing our diet. Is that the secret to healthy hair? Balance in everything.
Balance definitely seems to be a recurring theme here, and it's super important for overall health, which definitely affects our hair. Just like our bodies need a variety of nutrients to work right, our hair needs a balanced approach to thrive.
It's not just about taking one specific vitamin or using one miracle product. It's about creating an environment that supports hair health from the inside out. And speaking of a healthy environment, I came across some interesting stuff about the scalp's microbiome. Apparently, there's a whole ecosystem of bacteria living on our scalps, kind of like in our gut. I'll be honest, I never really thought about my scalp having its own microbiome before. Why is it so important?
Well, the scalp microbiome is super important for keeping your scalp healthy. Just like an imbalance in your gut microbiome can cause digestive problems, an imbalance on your scalp can lead to things like dandruff, itchiness, inflammation, and even hair loss.
So, just like we're learning to take care of the good bacteria in our gut, we need to be mindful of the bacteria on our scalp too. But how do we know if our scalp microbiome is out of whack? Are there any signs to look out for?
That's a great question. There aren't really any widely available tests for your scalp microbiome yet, but paying attention to any signs that your scalp is out of balance can be helpful. So if you're dealing with dandruff, itchiness, or inflammation that just won't go away, it could be a sign that your scalp microbiome needs some attention.
So, if our scalp is feeling irritated or not quite right, it might mean that our microbiome is struggling. What can we do to help these little guys out and get things back in balance?
Just like we can support gut health with probiotics and prebiotics, people are starting to use similar approaches for the scalp. You can now find hair care products that contain prebiotics or probiotics to help balance the scalp microbiome.
Wow, that's so interesting. So, instead of always trying to kill all the bacteria on our scalps, we might actually benefit from supporting the good bacteria that live there.
That's the idea. It's a new way of thinking about it. Instead of just trying to kill all germs, we're realizing that it's more about keeping a healthy balance within our microbial ecosystems.
It seems like we're still learning so much about the scalp microbiome, and our hair care routines are changing as we learn more. It's pretty cool to see how science is always uncovering new things about something as simple as our hair. But there's another factor we haven't talked much about: hormones. We talked a lot about DHT, but are there other hormones that can affect hair loss?
Definitely. Changes in hormones can have a big impact on hair growth. For instance, women often experience hair loss during pregnancy or menopause because of shifts in estrogen and progesterone levels.
So hair loss isn't just a guy problem then. Hormonal changes can affect women's hair just as much.
That's a really important point. Hair loss can happen to anyone, regardless of gender or age. And understanding the underlying causes, including hormones, is super important for finding the right solutions.
That makes sense, and it reinforces the need for personalized care, right? Taking into account all the different factors that could be playing a role. Are there any other hormonal imbalances besides those related to estrogen and progesterone that can contribute to hair loss?
Yes, thyroid hormone imbalances can also disrupt hair growth cycles. Your thyroid gland helps regulate your metabolism, and if it's either overactive or underactive, it can lead to hair shedding.
So if someone's noticing hair loss, it might be a good idea to get their thyroid levels checked, along with looking into other possible causes.
Absolutely. It's always a good idea to rule out any underlying health conditions that could be contributing to hair loss. A good evaluation by a healthcare professional is essential for figuring out the best way to address it.
Okay, so we've got DHT, other hormones, the scalp microbiome, and of course genetics. We touched on it earlier, but how big of a role do our genes actually play in hair loss? Is it all predetermined, or do we have some say in the matter?
Well, your genes definitely play a big part in determining whether you're predisposed to hair loss or not. Like we were talking about before, androgenetic alopecia, which is the most common type, has a strong genetic component. But remember, genes aren't the whole story.
So even if hair loss runs in the family, we're not necessarily destined to follow the same path. There's still hope.
Definitely. Genes set the stage, but they don't control everything. Environmental factors, lifestyle choices, and your overall health can all influence how your genes actually express themselves.
So even if we inherit those hair loss genes, there's still a lot we can do and influence how things turn out. That's pretty empowering.
Exactly. It's all about learning as much as you can and taking proactive steps to create the healthiest possible environment for your hair.
This has been such an eye-opening journey so far. We've delved into so many aspects of hair loss, from the science of DHT to the fascinating world of the scalp microbiome, but I know there's still more to uncover in your research. Are you ready for the final stretch of our hair loss deep dive?
I'm ready when you are. Let's see what other insights we can find and give our listener even more knowledge to help them on their hair loss journey.
All right, so we've covered a ton of ground already, from that DHT thing to keeping our scalp healthy. But I'm really kind of fascinated by those professional treatments we talked about before. Like, they seem like the next level of hair loss solutions.
Yeah, for sure. And from what I've seen in your research, it seems like you're especially interested in low-level laser therapy.
I gotta admit, the idea of wearing a laser helmet to make my hair grow back sounds pretty futuristic and kind of appealing too. Like, just put it on and boom, hair growth. But how does it actually work? Does it really do anything?
So low-level laser therapy, or LLT, uses specific wavelengths of light to stimulate the cells in your hair follicles. It's thought to boost blood flow and energy production, which can potentially help hair grow. What's kind of interesting is that even though it's getting more popular now, the technology's been around for a while, it's really the development of at-home devices that's made it more accessible, more appealing to people.
So instead of going to a clinic over and over, you could get the same benefits just chilling at home. That's a big deal for a lot of people. But you mentioned that the results can vary. What makes LLT work better for some people than others?
That's a good question. Like a lot of hair loss treatments, it really depends on the person, how severe their hair loss is, what's causing it, and how consistently they use it. Plus, it's not an instant fix. It takes time to see results.
So it's not like I put the laser helmet on once and suddenly have a full head of hair.
Not exactly. It's more about creating the right environment for your hair to grow over time.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like anything else worth having. You have to put in the work. Those at-home LLT devices sound really interesting. But I'm also curious about those in-office treatments we were talking about, like PRP and microneedling. They seem super effective, but also kind of intense. What should someone think about before going for those treatments?
The most important thing is to talk to a dermatologist who really knows about hair loss. They can look at your individual situation, figure out if those treatments are right for you, and talk about the potential benefits and risks. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Right, like you said before, personalized treatment is key. So let's say someone decides to go the professional route. What exactly happens during a PRP treatment? Is it painful? What's the recovery like?
So for a PRP treatment, they first draw a little bit of your blood, just like a regular blood test. Then they spin the blood in a machine to separate the platelet-rich plasma from everything else. And then they inject that concentrated PRP into your scalp, wherever you're losing hair.
So it's like giving your hair follicles a shot of growth factors.
Exactly. And the injections might feel a little uncomfortable, but most people don't mind it too much. There's usually not much downtime afterward. You can pretty much go back to your normal activities right away.
That's good to know. What about microneedling? How does that work and what's it like?
The microneedling, they use a device with tiny needles to make tiny punctures in your scalp. This basically triggers your body's natural healing process, which can stimulate collagen production and maybe even help your hair grow.
So it's like you're tricking your body into thinking it needs to repair the scalp, and that kickstarts all these good things for your hair follicles.
You got it.
But I'm guessing there's some downtime with microneedling. I mean, having tiny punctures in your scalp doesn't sound too pleasant.
You'll probably have some redness and swelling after the treatment, but it usually goes away within a day or two. Your dermatologist will give you instructions on how to take care of your scalp so it heals properly and to minimize any risks.
It's good to know that even though those procedures might sound a little scary, they're usually not too bad, and you don't have to put your life on hold to recover. But let's talk about something a little less high-tech for a minute, like our hair care routines. We often focus on treatments and products, but could the way we take care of our hair every day be affecting its health without us even realizing it?
For sure, how you treat your hair on a daily basis can really make a difference in how healthy and strong it is.
One thing that kept coming up in my research was how often to wash your hair. Some people swear by washing it every day, while others say it strips away natural oils and makes hair loss worse. What's the verdict on this age-old debate?
It's tough to say. There's no one right answer. It really depends on your hair type, how oily your scalp is, and what you prefer. For someone with oily hair, washing it more often might be necessary to keep their scalp clean and prevent buildup. But if you have live or sensitive skin, washing less often might be better to keep your scalp healthy.
So it's all about listening to your scalp and figuring out what works best for you. Again, it comes back to that personalized care thing.
Exactly. And even the type of brush you use can make a difference.
Oh, yeah. I remember seeing all these special brushes and detanglers when I was doing my research. Do those fancy brushes really matter, or is that all just marketing?
Having a good brush can definitely make a difference. Using a brush with harsh bristles, especially when your hair is wet, can cause breakage and damage. It's better to use a brush with soft, flexible bristles that detangle your hair gently without pulling or tugging.
Makes sense. It's like using the right tool for the job. But what about styling tools? Blow dryers, curling irons, straighteners. They make our hair look amazing, but are we damaging it in the long run?
Using heat styling too much can definitely take a toll on your hair. It can dry it out, cause breakage, and even split ends.
Okay, bummer. But I'm not giving up my curling iron just yet. Are there any ways to minimize the damage? I know some of those sources talked about heat protectant sprays. Do those really work?
Heat protectant sprays can definitely help. They basically create a barrier between your hair and the heat, which can reduce the damage. It's also a good idea to not use heat styling as often as you can. Try to use lower temperatures and don't keep the heat on the same section of hair for too long.
Good tips. It sounds like there's a lot we can do every day to keep our hair healthy and help it grow. But going back to nutrition for a second, we talked about vitamins and minerals, but what about our overall diet? Does what we eat really have that much of an impact on our hair?
Absolutely. Your hair is made up of protein, so it's super important to get enough protein in your diet. But it's not just protein. A healthy diet that includes lots of different nutrients, vitamins, minerals, healthy fats, all of that is important for your whole body, including your hair.
So it sounds like balance is really important. We've talked about balancing our scalp's pH, figuring out the right hair washing routine, and now a balanced diet. Is that the secret to healthy hair balance and everything?
Balance definitely seems to be a key theme here. It's important for our overall well-being, which definitely affects our hair. Just like our bodies need a variety of nutrients, our hair needs a balanced approach to thrive.
So it's not just about taking one magic vitamin or using one miracle product. It's about creating an environment that supports hair health from the inside out. And speaking of creating a healthy environment, I found some interesting stuff about the scalp microbiome. Apparently, there's a whole ecosystem of bacteria living on our scalps. Kind of like in our gut. I have to admit, I never really thought about my scalp having its own microbiome before. Why is that so important?
The scalp microbiome plays a big role in keeping your scalp healthy. Just like when the microbiome in your gut is out of whack, it can cause digestive problems. An imbalance on your scalp can lead to things like dandruff itchiness, inflammation, and even hair loss.
So, just like we're learning about taking care of the good bacteria in our gut, we need to pay attention to the bacteria on our scalp too. But how can we tell if our scalp microbiome is out of balance? Are there any signs we should be looking for?
That's a really good question. There aren't really any tests for your scalp microbiome that you can easily get right now. But you can pay attention to any signs that your scalp is out of balance. So if you have dandruff itchiness or inflammation that just won't go away, it might mean that your scalp microbiome needs some help.
So, if our scalp is feeling irritated or not quite right, it could be a sign that our microbiome is struggling. What can we do to help these little guys out and restore balance?
Well, just like we can take probiotics and prebiotics to support gut health, people are starting to do something similar for the scalp. Now you can find hair care products that include prebiotics or probiotics specifically for balancing the scalp microbiome.
That's so interesting. So instead of always trying to kill all the bacteria on our scalps, it might actually be better to support the good bacteria that live there.
Exactly. It's a whole new way of thinking. Instead of just killing all germs, we're starting to understand that it's more about finding a healthy balance in our microbial ecosystems.
It seems like we're still learning so much about the scalp microbiome that our hair care routines are changing along with it. It's pretty cool to see how science is always uncovering new things about something as basic as our hair. But there's something else we haven't talked much about hormones. I mean, we spent a lot of time on DHT, but aren't there other hormones that can affect hair loss?
Definitely. When your hormone levels change, it can have a big impact on your hair growth. For example, women often experience hair loss during pregnancy or menopause because their estrogen and progesterone levels are fluctuating.
So hair loss isn't just a guy thing. Hormonal changes can affect women's hair just as much.
Exactly. It's important to remember that hair loss can affect anyone, no matter their gender or age. Understanding the root causes, including hormones, is super important for finding solutions that actually work.
That makes sense. And it just goes to show how important personalized care is, taking everything into account, all the different factors that could be playing a role. Are there any other hormonal imbalances besides those related to estrogen and progesterone that can lead to hair loss?
Yes, thyroid hormone imbalances can also mess with your hair growth cycle. The thyroid gland is really important for regulating your metabolism, and both an overactive and an underactive thyroid can cause hair shedding.
So if someone's noticing they're losing hair, it might be worth getting their thyroid levels checked in addition to exploring other potential causes.
Definitely. It's always a good idea to make sure there aren't any underlying health conditions that could be causing the hair loss. Having a healthcare professional do a thorough evaluation is crucial for figuring out the best course of action.
Okay, so we've got DHT, other hormones, the scalp microbiome, and of course genetics. We talked about it a little bit before, but how much of a role do our genes really play in hair loss? Is it like destiny, or do we have some control over what happens to our hair?
Your genes definitely play a big part in whether you're likely to experience hair loss. Like we talked about before, androgenetic alopecia, which is the most common type, is strongly linked to genetics. But it's important to remember that genes aren't everything.
So even if there's a history of hair loss in our family, it doesn't mean we're doomed to follow the same path. There's still hope.
Absolutely, genes set the stage, but they don't tell the whole story. Things like environmental factors, your lifestyle choices, your overall health, all of that can influence how your genes are expressed.
So even if we inherit those hair loss genes, we can still do things to influence how things turn out. That's pretty amazing.
Exactly. It's all about learning as much as you can and taking steps to create the healthiest environment for your hair.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening. We've covered so much from the science of DHT to the incredible world of the scalp microbiome, and we've found so many insights to help our listeners with their hair loss journey. But I know there's even more to discover in your research. Are you ready for the final part of our hair loss deep dive?
I'm ready whenever you are. Let's uncover those last few insights and give our listeners even more knowledge to help them on their journey.
Okay, so we're ready to wrap up this hair loss deep dive, huh? We've covered a ton of ground already, but I'm excited to see what else is out there. What should we talk about next?
Well, we were just talking about how genetics and hair loss are connected, and how even if you're prone to hair loss, you can still do things to keep your hair healthy. And that actually leads us to one of the most fascinating things you found in your research, the scalp microbiome.
Right, right. We talked about how our scalp has its own little world of bacteria, just like our gut, and how if that microbiome gets out of balance, it can cause all sorts of scalp problems, even hair loss. It's kind of wild to think about how these tiny little things can have such a big impact on our hair.
It really shows you how connected everything in our body is and how things you wouldn't think are related can actually affect each other. And like you said before, just like we're learning to take care of the good bacteria in our gut, we're also starting to realize how important it is to take care of the bacteria on our scalp.
It's like we're gardeners, but instead of taking care of a garden in the ground, we're taking care of the garden on our scalp. So, what are some things people can do to have a healthy scalp microbiome? How can we create that perfect environment for hair growth?
One thing that's becoming more popular is using hair care products with prebiotics in them. Prebiotics are like food for the good bacteria. They help them grow and outnumber the bad bacteria.
So, it's like giving those good bacteria a little boost, helping them build a strong community on our scalps. I bet this is a pretty big change in how we think about hair cares. Instead of just cleaning and styling our hair, we're now thinking about all these little creatures living on our scalps, too.
It is. It's a really cool shift in how we understand hair health. And it's part of a bigger trend in healthcare where we're moving away from just trying to kill all germs and towards a more balanced approach that recognizes how important our good bacteria are.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that our bodies are these incredibly complex systems, and sometimes the best solutions are the ones that work with nature instead of against it.
Exactly. And speaking of working with nature, one of your sources brought up this interesting concept of hair cycles and how understanding them can help us manage our expectations about hair loss and deal with it better.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about the different phases of hair growth and anagen, catagen, telogen. It's like this constant cycle of growing, reheading, and shedding.
Right. And what's interesting is that all sorts of things can affect how long these cycles last and how healthy our hair is overall. Genetics, hormones, nutrition, even stress.
So it's not just about how much hair we're losing, but also how well our hair follicles are going through those different phases.
That's a great way to think about it. And one of the things that makes hair loss so tricky is that it can happen when any of those phases get messed up, or it can be a combination of different things.
It's like trying to solve a mystery. You have to look at all the clues and consider every possibility before you can figure out what's really going on.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to talk to a professional if you're worried about hair loss. A good dermatologist can help you figure out what's going on and create a treatment plan just for you.
Totally. They can help us separate fact from fiction when it comes to hair loss. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to talk about something that I think a lot of people struggle with, the emotional side of hair loss. It's not just about how it looks, right? It can really affect how we feel about ourselves.
You're absolutely right. Hair loss could be really hard emotionally for a lot of people. It could be tied to our sense of identity and how attractive we feel, and it can be tough to deal with those changes, especially in a world where looks are so important.
It's super important to acknowledge those feelings and get support if you need it, whether it's talking to a therapist, joining a support group, or connecting with others who are going through the same thing.
I totally agree. And even though there's no magic cure for hair loss, I think this deep dive has shown us that there are a lot of promising options out there, and we're learning more all the time. The most important thing is to have a holistic approach. Take care of yourself and remember that your worth isn't determined by how much hair you have.
I love that. And to everyone listening who might be feeling overwhelmed or discouraged, remember that you're not alone. Hair loss is really common, and there are lots of resources out there to help you. So as we finish up this awesome deep dive, what are some key things you want our listeners to remember?
Well, the first thing is that knowledge is power. The more you know about hair loss, the better decisions you can make about your hair health.
For sure. And don't be afraid to ask for help from a professional. A dermatologist can figure out what's going on with your hair, rule out any other health problems, and help you come up with a plan that works for you.
And lastly, be patient and don't give up. Finding the right solution for you might take some time and trying different things. It's okay if one thing doesn't work, just keep trying. And don't forget to celebrate the small wins along the way.
I love that. This deep dive has been all about feeling empowered. We've talked about everything from the science of DHT to the amazing world of the scalp microbiome, and we've learned so much that can help our listeners on their hair loss journey. So as we wrap up, remember that your hair is just one part of what makes you beautiful. Embrace what makes you unique. Focus on what makes you feel confident and amazing, and never underestimate the power of a good hair day.